Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online Alicization anime review. This one is going to be for episode 26 or episode 2 of War of the Underworld Alicization. But 26 overall. And yeah, this episode was called Raids. And it was a pretty interesting episode, definitely an episode of two halves. We got the first half of the episode focused on Alice and how she responds to the attack from the Dark Territory. And I suppose her call to action, she doubted herself in the first episode. What does she do now that there's a need for someone? And Kirito is not there to be the usual hero that he is. Will she step up? That's the question on that side of the episode. And then we also catch up with the start of this season. What's going on the Ocean Turtle? Because the reason Kirito's in this situation is because the Ocean Turtle was attacked. So we need to get the clarification for where do we stand on this side of things? What is actually happening? And I think they did a good job at that. I think that side of the episode was very sort of information heavy. It was very much just catching you up, and they sort of left it just before I think they're about to get into the big things. I still think it was good information in that we haven't had a ton of time on the Ocean Turtle, and they're setting up some nice things, but we still have to get the reveal of, I suppose, the villains, their names, their goals, kind of in a way. But we're starting to see the dots be connected, I think, is the main thing. So let's start off with the Alice section of the episode. The one kind of maybe issue would just be in terms of I wish they'd maybe structured maybe some of the scenes a little bit differently here to just help the sort of arc that she went on here come across just a little bit better. In that I felt they could have made it a little bit more important, the effect of Alice seeing Kirito crawl towards the swords, that even in the state that he's in, he is still trying to respond to the threat, the attack that's coming in, that she sort of hesitated when the attack came in, but Kirito was the one who also jumped into action, and she kind of refused the call from Eldred to kind of come back to the Integrity Knights, and she didn't know what direction to take. Kirito just immediately, despite his situation, was still willing to go ahead. I wish they'd focused a little bit more on just like the moment of Alice seeing Kirito doing that, and that being what sort of really causes her to realize what she needs to do. Now, they come back to it later on in the episode referring to it. I just wish that they'd almost waited until after the opening to show the scene of Kirito, like Alice seeing Kirito like that, just because it was meant to be the sort of call to action. Basically, was her seeing what Kirito did. But yeah, so she comes in. Obviously, the attack is on Rulid Village, and it's her kind of having to meet up with her father again, but also getting to see Salka again. And she, of course, wants to help, and she rushes there on the dragon, of course. And the main thing that she encounters here is that people aren't listening to her. They don't know that she's an Integrity Knight. They just think that it's Alice who has returned, and she happens to know how to use a sword now, and there's she's different, and that she's back from her punishment, and she's lost her memory, sort of thing. That's what she's told everyone up to now. She's wearing the cloak over her armor, and all they can see is that she's wearing like a little bit of armor, but they don't know how important she is actually. So the big thing I think in this episode was her not being listened to by anyone. Her telling everyone to evacuate. I'll do this. You need to get the people away so that they have a chance to live. You have the sort of evil guy who's just concerned about his his mansion and his business, wanting to stay, not listening to Alice because it's just Alice. So it forces her into this situation where in I think sort of contrast to the Eldry scene, she has to now again embrace the fact that she is a knight, that she may not appreciate how she became a knight and the origins of this, but that's who she is at this point. She, is trying to be Alice Zuberg and have a good relationship with her sister and also with her father, but she is also a knight at this point, and it's trying to sort of put together, both sides of who the character is. Having Synthesis 30 finally interact with the sort of Alice Zuberg side of her life, but also incorporate the 30 aspect into the Zuberg stuff, and just sort of almost like complete the character now that the kind of core that made Alice who she was in the past is gone with Yu-Gi-Oh! I think it's a very interesting and complicated kind of situation that 30 is Alice, but it is a different version of Alice. But there's enough of like the core of who Alice is that it is the same person, and it's complicated. But I think that's part of what makes it so interesting, that that this character has this kind of unique relationship, like primarily with Kirito, but she didn't really know Yu-Gi-Oh! All that well, whereas Alice Zuberg was childhood friends with Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh! Those type of things, the differences in the sort of memories of each character. But she finally reveals herself to be Integrity Knight. Finally, everyone listens to her. And the main thing here is just that it is her finally accepting that she's a knight again, and realizing that she can't sort of hide away anymore. She is needed. Seeing this town, her town, attacked, she now realizes that she may not appreciate maybe what the knights were formed to do, but they are the knights. They are the ones who need to help people, and she will do what she has to do to help her town, to protect her sister, protect her father, and continue the sort of path that Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh! Were taking, that they inspired her, and that she's taking a new path that's not just the typical Integrity Knight path. And I thought that was really well done in this episode, and how they did it in the middle of her hometown. Seeing her solo basically defend her village from the Dark Territory, and sort of prove herself to the village, and now she's taking Kirito to, we assume, join back up with the Integrity Knights and actually properly join the fight. So this has gotten Alice back on track. She now sort of has direction, and very different than the first episode. So I think they maybe could have hit the point home a little harder, what inspired Alice, that sort of thing. I still think they did it really well. Not too much on the heavy action here, because it was just goblins and nothing particularly fancy, but big moment of her using her sword, activating the armament, just taking them out, and yeah, she gets the big victory here, and obviously has to say goodbye once again to Selka and also her father. And they sort of pointed out a little bit that the father is a little bit more back on track now. He's sort of beginning to accept things a little bit more. There's a certain respect that he has for, obviously, Alice as an Integrity Knight, but Selka kind of gets across the idea that there's also a little bit of the sort of fatherly side coming back as well. So in general, I think pretty good stuff overall, which transitions us into the Ocean Turtle side of the episode. So we obviously knew that the Ocean Turtle was under attack from a sort of paramilitary organization, and they just double down on that here, that they figure out from watching the video that it's clearly not sort of them being betrayed by like the Japanese military or the Special Defense Force, that clearly the people here aren't Asian, so they're foreign, some sort of foreign military. They can't figure it out exactly, but they realize that they must have enough information to also know about the AI research going on here. That's why they're being targeted, and that's why they're being so specifically targeted, that they know what they're looking for. And so it creates this really interesting situation where we have our sort of main characters in the Ocean Turtle in the sub-control room. The military force has taken over the actual control room, and they all have access to like a certain amount. They each have access to a certain amount of the Ocean Turtle, and it's now about what do they do from here on out. The main, I think, core of what's to get at here is that they're again pointing out the importance of the Alice AIs, the bottom-up AIs that have sort of been basically created in the underworld, with obviously Alice being one of them, but also, the likes of, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was one, and so on. But Alice is the main one in that she is the first Alice AI and the sort of main one that everyone is after, both because she is an Alice AI, but she's also the main one. So that's the importance here, is to eject the light cube that contains the Alice as a person, the AI, the artificial light. Eject that out of the light cube cluster to retrieve for their respective side. So the military want it for who knows what, we don't know just yet, and then we obviously know why sort of Kikuoka wants it. It is ultimately for a military type situation to have an AI that can kill people. That's why they needed the AIs to be able to sort of break through the third eye seal, to have AIs who in the game were able to go past the taboo index. That was the importance, because if they couldn't break through the taboo index in the game, there's no way they could follow the orders they'd be given as AIs in the real world, military AIs. Obviously, the big question as we progress towards the end of this arc and so on is going to be the likes of Kirito, Asuna, and so on. They, of course, are not going to want an AI which they are now going to see as being just as valuable as a normal person used in this way. And how do they convince them to not use it for military purposes, to protect Alice from a certain point of view? So, they're siding with Kikuoka now to save Alice, but they are not going to want Alice to be used by Kikuoka for what he wants her for. So that's the kind of important thing there. Now, very clearly, they're also setting up here, Asuna is going to need to go into the underworld. I think that was her looking at the empty soul translator that's there, them pointing out that Kirito, based on their analysis of what happened, they now understand that he's in the kind of sort of borderline coma state that he's in right now. But he is the only one who's going to be able to actually, from within the game, eject Alice as an AI, her light cube. So there's going to be a need to put someone else in the game to allow that to happen. And from Asuna's point of view, based on the description they gave of what has actually happened to Kirito, she, I think, is very much going to think that she needs to be the one to, in the game, talk to Kirito to somehow get him back. Because the description, it's a sort of complex description, but they give us, finally, I suppose, clarity on what exactly happened to Kirito at the end of the last season. Like, I think the easy explanation that we had was just that the power was cut on the ocean turtle, which was powering the soul translator, which was healing Kirito's brain. It went off, so it reversed and did even more damage. And they sort of point out that, yes, that's part of it, but actually the main point with the damage was that the short wouldn't have caused much damage, but the reason it did cause damage here and did what it did to Kirito was because at the moment that spike happened, that power cut happened, and there was the kind of energy kind of stuff happening, he was blaming himself. He was sort of overloading, spiking his light because he just, Yujiro has just been killed and he wasn't able to protect him and save him. He's dealing with the emotion of that. Plus he just, defeated the administrator and stuff like that. He blames himself for the loss of his best friend right as the power spike happened, and the idea is that they say effectively he was hurting his own light, and then the power spike just made it into an even worse thing, and it effectively turned off his ego, as they explain it, which is it turns off the aspect, like his personality. So that's why he's in this sort of comatose state, but is still able to move and do certain things. Like they sort of explain, it's the deeply ingrained memories that are sort of integral to who he is that are still driving him. Hence why it's the sort of, when he sees someone in trouble, he goes to try and help them, but he can't answer simple and obvious questions. Like they give the example of if you wanted a seconds at a restaurant, you'd always say no, even if you actually really did want it. That's like a decision that you make. Kirito isn't able to do that right now, so they're setting up the idea that they say his light is actually okay. A lot of the damage is sort of, they don't quite say it's been healed, but no extra damage has been done, so the soul translator is still sort of doing its work. The power cut isn't a factor anymore, it's back on with the auxiliary power. it's now all about sort of getting Kirito to sort of almost like reverse himself, or by saying something to him to reverse the damage that's been done, to sort of turn Kirito back on somehow. But it now turns it into more of a sort of character development type thing. How will they get through to Kirito to sort of stop him from blaming himself for what happened to Yu-Gi-Oh is the big thing. So Asuna sort of getting through to him, if she gets into the game, would be a big thing. And then with the enemy forces, they're obviously right at the end of the episode. There's that bit right at the end where we get a look at some of our characters who we don't have the names for yet. They're also, I suppose, thinking of the same thing, that they're going to have to get someone into the game to eject the light cube cluster. That was the whole complicated explanation about who has what access to what and stuff like that. That both sides are now cut off from just directly give me that light cluster. They have to go into the game to get it. So that's the situation. Also, it's important to note the connection between this and the very first episode of Alicization, with the GGO sequence that we got of the team facing off against that sort of military squad who sort of quit at the last minute because they were facing a team that was using the kind of game systems, and it wasn't much of a military kind of tactics thing anymore. And it's this same group. They were using GGO to allow them to practice actual sort of military plans, and we'll see that, I suppose, probably referenced as we go forward. But either way, I think solid episode. Really like the Alice stuff at the start. I wish they'd maybe kept one of the scenes until after the opening, just to tie the whole episode together a little bit more, not have it have to wait through the opening to get the aftermath of that. But similarly with the second half of the episode, maybe a little bit too lengthy with some of the details, which maybe weren't as important. But I thought they got to the right point at the end in terms of like, okay, we now know the full situation on the Ocean Turtle. What happens from here can sort of be more of the action actually happening, making the decisions. How does Asuna get in? How does like account systems in this game work? And then of course we're going to have to get properly introduced to the villains. Who is that guy? Who's that other guy? What are they up to? We don't have the details just yet. Almost forgot to mention as well the scene I really, really liked, which was, of course, Asuna going right up to Kikuoka, kind of lifting him up by the collar and just being furious at him. You know, I won't forgive you if something really terrible happens to Kirito. And I liked it because it was this moment where like she was just so intense that she just got this insane strength, and even just the aftermath of it, where she finally puts him down and she almost just like collapses back into Rinko, that like she just had like exerted like so much energy like lifting him up, like this power she didn't know she had. It was a really cool scene to show just how sort of intense she is, and that even though she's not part of the military or anything like that, like she's not letting her opinion get lost among them talking about like all this science stuff about AIs and stuff like that. That she's here for Kirito and she wants, like, she's being his advocate here, which I do really, really like. So it was definitely one of the highlight scenes of the episode. But yeah, that's my thoughts on this episode of Sword Art Online Alicization. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.